Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 4. Jason pulled the machete out of the head of the midget, and then stabbed the Hell's Angel through the stomach. The biker fell back, disbelief etched on his every feature, and then froze. While everything around him continued to move, the biker remained suspended in a snapshot of recoil. Body arched, arms flailing, head thrown back, hair floating yet motionless. His immobility defied the laws of physics. Suddenly there was a flash of lightning, and the entire image rotated 90 degrees. It jittered, it blurred, it flew across the chest of the motionless victim, and zoomed in on Jason's hockey mask. The face guard was flecked with arterial spray, but the plastic was so slick that the blood just ran off it and dripped onto Jason's tanned breasts. Breasts that had been pumped up with silicone to an alluringly spherical 34E. A white micro-bikini barely covered Jason's nipples as she wriggled and sashayed from one victim to the next. A pump jockey, a preacher man, a snake oil salesman, they all fell under her machete, and as each man died, he too was frozen just like the biker in mid-spasm, until Jason had converted the whole cemetery into a maze of twisted pain. Ladies and gentlemen, step aside, Jack the Stripper's graveyard of go-go. A two-dimensional landscape of deadwood, headstones, and hookers. A neon-lit burial field, where man-made angels fought against one another in a display of German expressionism, and where open graves lay scattered like roadkill. Clouds of dry ice coiled around Jason as she pole-danced on a hangman's gibbet. Save for the hockey mask and the bikini, the young woman with the long blonde hair was butt naked, and her porn star body was drenched with blood. A dead man sat up in his coffin. Jason saw him, and keeping to the beat of the music, ground her spandex-clad Brazilian in his curious face. The sky rippled with CGI menace as Jason faked her orgasm. Then she positioned the machete behind the zombie's neck, took the blade in both hands, and slowly pulled it towards her, guillotining her undead victim. The ghoul opened his mouth to scream, but all Jason could hear was the heavy metal soundstorm of Fright Day 13, the latest single by horror metal legend Ross Fatu, because this was a music video, and renowned Hollywood porn star Jaomi Marantez was the main attraction. While Fatu sang, Marantez was dressed like Jason, dressed to fuck and kill. Hack the motherfuckers, fuck the mother hackers, hack the motherfuckers. Yeah, yeah. Fright Day 13, 13 die. Hey, yeah, here's blood in your eye. First you're gonna run, then you're gonna cry. Fright Day 13, die. The track burst into a guitar solo that wailed and screamed over a doom-laden riff. The barrage of sound leaving spaces for audio samples of actual TV news reports from the old Crystal Lake murders. 8 corpses have been discovered in what is already being called the most brutal and heinous crime in local history. Bodies were found literally strewn over the 4-square-mile campground. The person responsible for the Crystal Lake horror remains at large. The end of the final sample was repeated over and over, increasing in distortion as the solo built to a finger-blistering climax. At large, at large, at large, at large. Jaomi threw the machete aside, jumped down into the desecrated grave, and started to make out with the zombie. Suddenly, the whole image was a mess of celluloid scratches, and color turned to black and white, before the screen was taken up by the man himself, Ross Fatu, singer-songwriter, millionaire, obsessive fan of Jason Voorhees, and the legal, wedded husband of one Jaomi Marantez. Fatu was the kind of performer kids loved and parents switched off. Every song he wrote was a paean to the Crystal Lake massacres, and every video he made was an essay in unease. Although Ross didn't know it, his #1 fan was a kid from Seattle, who owned every one of Ross's 7 platinum-selling albums. The kid's name was Trick. Ross growled the chorus into a vintage microphone while aiming a spear gun straight at the audience. The video was being shot in 3D. His trademark look was based on that of the vampire Graf Orlok from the 1922 classic movie Nosferatu. Just like Orlok, Ross shaved his head, but unlike Orlok, who was almost completely bald, Ross had left a few strands of hair dotted erratically across his scalp. The hairs didn't form any pattern, and they were far too long. They just hung down his back and made him look retarded. But according to some reports, that was exactly how Jason looked. And Jason Voorhees was more than just Fatu's hero. Jason was his god. When Ross was working, he also put on special makeup that gave him a bat-like appearance. His eyes were hollow, his ears pointed. He built up a hook nose, wore black contacts, and his fingers were elongated into talons. On video shoots, he also wore 2 rows of fangs. But for live appearances, forget it. He tried singing with them once, and he sounded like an asthmatic duck. His costuming was equally dramatic. The centerpiece was a period gray long coat with 13 embroidered fastenings running down his torso, like massive sutures. Beneath the coat, he wore pants put together from different scraps of cloth. Take the left leg, part of a Texan flag, had been sewn next to some frayed denim. The denim sewn next to a square of leather with a hand-painted skull motif. And there were holes all over. The broken thread was clearly visible, but it was all fake. Ross had paid an LA designer over $2,000 to get that homemade grunge look, and the kids loved it. Throughout his career, Ross had looked pretty much the same. With increased sales, there had been an upgrade in quality, especially with the bat makeup. But the core concept hadn't changed much since he invented it back in '96. Occasionally, he used props, skull-topped canes, top hats, diaphanous shrouds, and all the usual horror paraphernalia. And his skin was a shifting mess of studs, rings, and other jewelry, whether he was performing or not. But for Fright Day 13, Ross had decided to keep it simple, because Jaomi was the star of this video. If his wife's naked, man-killing, psychopathic butt couldn't shift units of his new single, nothing could. Did you see that? Alice pointed at the picture on her portable TV. She was sitting in the RV with her father, watching Jaomi Morantes lick the blood off her machete. That's what kids want, Alice continued. Tits and gore. They want serial killers like Jason Voorhees. Hey, didn't he come from New Jersey someplace? My child, we've had this discussion 1,000 times, replied her father as he sipped on a mug of tea. The carnival is a waxwork of horrors, not a traveling burlesque. I've seen rock concerts on television. The crowds are full of delinquents. Alice gave up trying to remember what she'd heard about Jason and reached for her coffee. She knew her father could smell the whiskey in it, but what did she care? It was late. She needed to come down from a day behind the wheel. They're not delinquents, they're just kids, she replied. George forced himself to glance at the video a second time, and was appalled by what he saw. Jaomi was rubbing her crotch with the handle of the machete. Filth! Spat her father, and he turned the portable TV off. Dad, audience have changed. Shitty old puppets don't cut it anymore. People want sex. They want blood and gore. Kids are more sophisticated now. Sophisticated? He struggled through his lisp. Is it sophisticated to behave like an animal? Alice groaned. She could tell the old man was working up to a speech. That's the problem with the world these days. Everything's for sale, and the customer is always right. Drugs, guns, prostitution. And with the technology available, people expect instant gratification. But if you say that what someone is doing is wrong or immoral, people stare at you as if you're some kind of lunatic or a Nazi. It doesn't matter if someone's an ill-mannered drunkard addicted to pornography. All people care about is whether or not his credit card rating is good. You finished yet? Alice knocked back the rest of her drink. The hot coffee helped get the booze into her veins faster. Give it 10 minutes and she'd be ready to hit the hay. They'd not been parked outside Crystal Lake for long, but already the carnival was set for the night. Some of the guys had mentioned going into town, but Alice had talked them out of it. She wanted the show to keep a low profile, at least until they had a chance to rest. Dad, when did you forget what the sideshow business is about? She asked, stifling a yawn. We're here to take money off marks, not make friends with them. Frankenstein and Dracula are timeless, he persisted. People love the classics. Alice rose to her feet. That's the problem. They love them, but they're not afraid of them. We've got no reputation. I've spent my whole life working the show, and I've never had a new dress. George rested his elbows on his knees, clasped his hands, and lowered his head. Alice, I've always tried to give you... I know, she interrupted, but trying doesn't pay the bills. Look, Dad, if you seriously want this show to have a future, you've got to try things my way. We need to find a new audience. Maybe become a vampire circus or a murder show. I've been speaking to Sparks, and he thinks... George reacted sharply. You've what? Alice realized what she'd done. She just let it slip that she'd already spoken with the others. She'd undermined her father's authority. So now she could either bullshit her way out of trouble, or she could come clean and force him to hand over the show. She was still wondering what to do when a brick came crashing through the RV window. It had taken 2 seconds. 2 ticks of realization before Trick's fear had been kicked into touch by sheer excitement. Sweet jumpin' Jehoshaphat, he whooped. We've hit the fucking mother lode. Glow said nothing. She just stared at the shrine in a hypnotic stupor. Zemal, however, wasn't so quiet. Trick, this is so freakathon. Let's get out of here. Out of bounds, he shouted. This stuff's what we came here for. It's beyond triple fucking A. Well, I don't like it. Zemal scrunched her face. But look! He trained his flashlight on one of the 3 bodies. A black and white bathrobe and that ice pick in her head. It's Alice Hardy. It's gotta be. She's the only girl who survived the 1980 murders committed by Pamela Voorhees. She killed Pamela, but then she disappeared from her apartment 2 months later. There was blood everywhere, and her parents described this exact bathrobe. Everyone thinks Jason took revenge on Alice for killing his mom, but no one's been able to prove it until right motherfucking now. He turned the light onto the remains of a second girl, a corpse dressed in old-fashioned jogging pants. Oh, this is too much, he babbled. Jason went on his first killing spree in '84. It lasted a week, and in the first 2 days he killed 7 people at a counselor training center. But 2 of the bodies went missing. The first was a girl named Terry. I don't remember her last name. Well, this is her, and that's... He moved the beam to the right and illuminated the body of a cop. Is the second... I'm feeling nauseous. The stench was turning Zemal's stomach. She's talking to me, Glow murmured out of the blue. What? Asked Zemal. Her expression showed every sign that she was tired of the little freak. She's talking to me, said Glow again. Trick ignored her and aimed his light straight at the severed head. Was this how those old guys felt when they'd opened the pyramids? Come to think of it, the head reminded him of an Egyptian mummy that he'd seen once in a museum. Skin like brown paper, wisp of white hair, exposed teeth, vacant eye sockets. Geez, Pam sure looked rough. Zemal took the unused flashlight out of Glow's hand. Then she held it up close to the girl's eyes and turned it full on. No longer funny, she spat. Glow's transformation was so abrupt that it merely confirmed Zemal's suspicion that her friend had been faking it all along. What'd you do that for? Asked Glow, looking about the room in bewilderment. Where are we? Zemal was about to reply, but Trick did it for her. He hadn't noticed the change in Glow's demeanor at all, but once he heard her voice, he just had to go fishing for Glowster points. Glow! Look! He shouted. Look at this! Pamela motherfucking goddamn Voorhees! Luck factor 10, or what? For the first time since the girl had regained control of her faculties, she saw the head sitting upon the table. She saw the bodies, and suddenly everything made sense. We need to go, she said. Then she grabbed hold of Zemal's sleeve and began to pull the girl towards the door. Trick, she called. Oh, come on, he whined. Glow, I thought you'd be up for this more than any of us. You're the queen of Crystal fucking Lake. Leave it, she repeated. Those voices I've been hearing. It's her. Pamela Voorhees. She's been watching me. She lured me here. Fuck! He roared. Dead people don't talk. What is wrong with you, girl? Please, Tricky, begged Zemal. Elvira's right. Let's go. We'll call the popos and they can CSI the shit out of this dump. The boy didn't know what freaked him more, the fact that Glow wanted nothing to do with this awesome Voorhees collectible, or the fact that Zemal had actually sided with her on something. If you think, he started the pace, I'm going to let Sergeant Dillweed come here and put my fucking head inside his bowling bag. Zemal wished she had a gun. When Trick got real mad, he went totally Jim Carrey. Listen to me, pleaded Glow. That fucking witch is taking over my mind. It's a trap. She wants out of here. I can hear her right now. Oh, yeah? Trick couldn't believe what he was even having this conversation. What did she say exactly? Glow stared him in the eye and said, She's saying, kill the boy. That's it, said Zemal. This is so yesterday. She made straight for the outer room leading to the exit. Glow went to follow her. No, wait, called Trick. He ran over to the table, leaned over the dead bodies, and lifted the head of Mrs. Voorhees from its resting place. No sooner had he done so than both flashlights went out. What is the meaning of this? George held out the brick that had just been used to break his window. He was standing in the doorway of the RV, looking out at a mob of 20 to 30 locals ganging up in front of the truck. Most of them were armed, guns, baseball bats, wrenches, and knives. One of them even carried an unlit Molotov, and they were in an ugly mood. One guy shone a light in George's eyes, while another blew a loud horn. Behind them was Jonah. The drunk laughed and danced with the fresh bottle of liquor as payment for warning the townsfolk. Oh, I told the little bastard. I told him you'd all die, but he wouldn't listen. So now you're gonna cry. The other inhabitants of Crystal Lake were far less poetic, as they hurled a volley of abuse at Whitney. Get out, fucking perverts! Get out of town! Don't want your kind. This is God's country. Get the fuck out of town. Leave Crystal Lake. Go now. Break your fucking necks. Go back where you came from. A soda bottle smashed against the RV, a few inches to the left of George's head. Dad! Alice was just inside the trailer behind him. I'm all right, dear, he replied. Then he faced the mob a second time. We've done nothing wrong. You can't treat us like this. We have rights. A man stepped forward and walked right up to the door. He had the build of a linebacker and the overalls of a mechanic. There was oil on his face, and he was brandishing a tire iron. Suddenly, the mob went quiet, so that they could all hear what the grease monkey had to say. You better leave, mister, he warned, shaking the iron. People here have seen enough horror without trailer trash like you cashing in on it. The crowd cheered and blew the air horn, and 2 more bottles were thrown at the motorhome. But I don't understand, said George, only now he was starting to cough. Shit, gasped Alice, smacking her forehead. That music video, Jason Voorhees. Crystal Lake. Shit. The mechanic nodded in her direction, but kept his eyes on George. Your girlfriend understands. Now go on. Clear out before we throw you out. George stepped down onto the asphalt and raised himself to his full height, which was still some way short of the mechanic. How dare you! Fumed the old man, but then he was stricken with the pain in his chest. He staggered forward and grabbed onto the mechanic's overalls to stop himself from falling to the ground. Take your hands off me, growled the big guy. George was so racked with hacking spasms that he couldn't have relaxed the grip if he'd wanted to. The coughing was growing much worse now. I said, get your filthy hands off of me. The mechanic raised the tire iron as if getting ready to slug the old man. No! Alice ran out and locked her hands round the man's wrist and elbow. Then she twisted his arm and bent it back against itself. The mechanic couldn't believe it. She was a stick of a girl, but her muscles were like steel. He cried with pain and the weapon fell out of his hand. Then she put an arm around her father and pushed the troublemaker away. Hit an old man, you filthy fucking coward! She looked around the RV park, but couldn't see any of the other carnies, except Kenton, who was parked away from all the rest, leaning against the hood of his pickup. Even from this distance, Alice could see the bastard was laughing, enjoying the fix she and her father were in. One day, she swore, she'd kill him. Now, however, the mob was closing in on her, and she really didn't have any answers. Ma lowered herself back into her easy chair. She was bleeding like a weasel with the pineapple up its pussy, but too damn still to shed any tears. Pa leaned over and sniffed the burns. Boiled pork. "For the sake of Ma's accident," said Enoch over by the range, "I won't break your fucking balls." His arm was still bleeding, and there were other fresh nicks dotted about his body. But Francis was cut just as bad. If anything, it looked as if Enoch's cleaver had won the argument. Nevertheless, Francis remained adamant that Jason should be put on a spit. And now it seemed his older brother was going to grant that one concession. "Good," said Francis, nursing a wound in his side. "I'll go putting my special blend of herbs and spices on the fucker." He went and fetched an earthenware jar down from the shelf. Then he popped out the cork stopper and poured a heap of dried leaves all over Jason's body. No one seemed to care that Jason still wore his clothes. Across the room, Enoch was contemplating the huge fireplace. They had a spit there permanently, but it was nowhere near big enough for 4 trees, and turning the bastard was going to be a bitch. The inbred threw some wood on the fire and walked over to the family table. He reckoned he'd have to cut Jason up. "Hey, upchuck fuck," he called to his brother. "Help me carry 4 trees over to the fire. If I slice 'em there, I won't have so far to go with the meat." "Fuck, man, tits, can't you see I'm busy?" Francis had started preparing some vegetables. He was bleeding all over the potatoes, but the tin tub was still on the boil. Francis dropped a couple of chopped carrots into the water, the orange segments bobbing against the raccoon carcass. Cussing under his breath, Enoch grabbed hold of Jason's ankles and started to drag the killer off the family table. He pulled and pulled until suddenly there was a loud thump as Jason's head slid over the edge, plummeting to the ground. While this was going on, Francis walked by and, without a word of warning, tossed a pail of cold water into Ma's face. "That should stop your squealing. Stop that fucking squealing, Ma," he shouted, but it only made her cry even more. When Pa saw Ma's soaking hair drooping over the blisters on her face, he broke out into giggles. "Hey, y'all," called Enoch. "I got an announcement to make." "You and 4 trees getting hitched?" snickered Francis. That got a good family laugh, even from Ma. "No, you piece of cock-itch," huffed Enoch. "I'm taking off 4 trees en masse. Y'all need come and look." Enoch finished dragging Jason's body down beside the fireplace. Ma and Pa cheered and clapped their hands like retarded kindergartners. Even Francis was getting excited. Yellow light flickered across the hockey mask, but still Jason showed no sign of life. He just lay there, flat on his back. "Okay, everyone," said Enoch, flexing his fingers. "I want you all to give me a count of 3. Ready?" They nodded and then joined in a shambles of a countdown. 1, 2... Enoch reached down and placed his hands on Jason's mask. Alice took another step back. She had her arms around her father, who was still caught in a paroxysm of hacking coughs. Yet another bottle smashed against the RV. 2 of the townsmen started to rock the motorhome while the others edged forward, tightening their noose around the Whitneys. "Leave us alone!" screamed Alice, and she pulled her father close to her side, expecting any second to feel a siren tore through the air, and suddenly the crowd made like one of the soda bottles hitting the trailer. By the time the 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the RV, there wasn't a single member of the lynch mob to be seen. "Thank God," sighed Alice. She was surprised to discover she had tears in her eyes. "Come on, Dad," she said, rubbing the old man's chest. "It's okay now." The other showmen began to emerge from their vehicles. They looked sheepish. Just the sight of them made Alice mad. When push came to shove, they'd been no help at all. Not even Mentor. Sheriff Haslip got out of his car. He was clean-shaven, didn't have much of a punch, and everything about the way he moved said he was a guy who was used to being listened to. He strolled over to the 2 deputies in the second car and sent them off to check the perimeter of the RV park. Then he came back to speak with Alice and her father. "Officer," began the old man, fighting to regain his breath, "you arrived just in time." Haslip raised a hand to stop Whitney going any further. "Sir, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you all to leave town." George reacted as if he'd been stung. "What now? Do you know what time it is, officer?" "There's nothing I can do about that." "It's your truck, see?" He nodded at the gaudy painting on the side of the semi. "The good people of Crystal Lake are sensitive to this sort of stuff." "But can't we stay till morning?" George was almost pleading. "No can do. The minute we leave, they'll come back and finish what they started. The way I heard it, one of your people hit Crazy Jonah." "One of my people?" Whitney found it impossible to believe. "Yeah, Jonah came into town and got everyone all worked up. Look, I'm sorry, but I don't have the manpower to babysit you guys. You're going to have to leave immediately." George bowed his head. "Very well, officer," he sighed. "Very well." Alice, however, was tired of being messed around. She got between her father and the sheriff and started to bawl the cop out. Haslip thought the woman had a face like thunder and tattoos to match. But there was something about her sass that made him warm to her. "So tell me how you're any different from the vigilantes," she shouted. Kenton Freely had come over to listen. Standing just a few yards away, he was enjoying the show Alice was putting on. Solely because of that, she suddenly felt the urge to shut up. "Look, Miss, Haslip began. "Alice Jane Whitney." "Well, look, Miss Whitney, I'm doing this for your own security. I can't protect you from these people." "You're supposed to be the fucking law." "Please, Alice." Her father was appalled by her lack of respect. "Let's just pack up and go. Come on." Haslip, however, wanted her to see sense. "Look, Miss Whitney, I can't lock up half the town. My job's to keep the peace, and the easiest way I can do that is to help you people on your way." "Well, thanks." She turned on her heels and walked around to the power hookup on the far side of the RV. As she began unplugging the cord, she could hear the sheriff trying to explain to her father. "Need help?" Kenton had snuck up behind her. "With the juice, I mean." "Why don't you drop dead, Freely?" She didn't even bother to look away from the outlet. He lit up a cigarette. "Too bad. You look stressed. Maybe if you gave me some sugar, slap me around a little, it could help ease the tension." He exhaled his smoke into her hair. Alice took the cable in her hands and looked Freely square in the eye. "I saw you grinning back there when that mob was threatening us, and I bet on my mother's fucking grave you're the one who hit the town nut and got us into this mess." Kenton smirked. "Who? Me?" He blew more smoke in her face, but she refused to flinch. "You better get back in your pickup and fuck the hell off. You're fired." Freely laughed and took another drag on his high tar stick. "You can't do that, Toots. You know that." "Dad will." "Your father'll do nothing. Now why don't you and I just patch up our differences with a good, long fuck?" Alice pushed Kenton aside, submitting a formal response to his proposal. "Fuck off!" Then she went back round to where her father and the sheriff were still talking. Kenton followed her. "Come on, Alice," he teased. "Everyone else in the show's licked your twat, so why twat me?" George's mouth fell open, while Haslip looked aside and shuffled his feet. "Alice," said the old man as she walked past, "is that true?" But the young woman just climbed aboard the RV and slammed the door. That flashlight stunt had been the final straw. Zemal and Trick ran out of the shack, the girl screaming, the boy laughing hysterically. Dark clouds had moved in across the sky, their tenebrous mass extinguishing the stars and confining the moonbeams to a tight circle over on the far side of the clearing. But Zemal ran the opposite way, making for the path they'd come in on, while Trick stopped dead in his tracks. "The head!" he cursed. "I've dropped the fucking head!" He must have let go when the blackout had almost made him shit his pants. "Screw the fucking head," shouted Zemal, and she carried on sprinting in the direction of the trail. Trick didn't want to go back inside the hut, but he wasn't leaving without his star prize. So with Zemal's footsteps fading in the distance, he reluctantly turned and saw Glow calmly step outside the door. The girl seemed strangely composed. Another shift within her personality. Yet Trick didn't notice. All he had time for was a severed head she was carrying in her right hand. She was holding the relic up high, like an old-fashioned lantern, and was moving towards the spot where the moonlight hit the ground. "Glow!" shouted the boy. "Way beyond cool!" He ran over and snatched the head of Mrs. Voorhees away from her. Glow snarled wordlessly and shot a hand down to her left hip, as if she expected to find something hanging off her belt. But there was nothing there. She hissed as the boy turned the petrified body part over in his hands like a basketball. "I can't see it," he whined, squinting. "It's too fucking dark." "Then why don't you—" The girl's voice was laced with venom. She stopped, composed herself, and tried again. Only now she sounded like a parody of Grandma Walton. "All right, dear. Why don't you be a good boy and take it over there, where the moonlight's shining? Then you'll be able to see it as much as you like." "Duh!" He kicked himself. Then he lifted the head and held it like a ventriloquist dummy. A little prop comedy for Glow's amusement. "Trig, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Glow pretended to laugh, but when Trick turned away, her face was consumed with hatred. Ahead along the trail, Zemal was trying her flashlight, her cell, everything, but nothing worked. All the same, she wasn't going back to the shack. No way. But she didn't want to get lost either, so she decided she'd go as far as the end of the trail and then wait there for the others. Fuck! She just stepped in that puddle again. Back at the clearing, Trick was about to walk beneath the shaft of silvery moonlight. "That's right, dear," Glow purred. "Go on. You'll be able to see me, I mean the head, much better in the lights." The boy stepped into the lights. For the first time in a quarter of a century, the head of Pamela Voorhees was bathed in the superlunary aura of the moon. A full moon, like that which had enshrined the moment of her beheading. Her every ghastly lineament was suffused with dark energy. She immediately channeled the power and directed it to the one who needed it the most. Jason sat bolt upright, grabbed a blazing coal from the fireplace, and thrust it into Enoch's mouth. Enoch clawed at his face, but the burning chunk was too large and too damn hot to pull out. Smoke poured through his blackening lips. His cheeks glowed from the fire within, and all he could do was scream and twist with pain. His face was being grilled from the inside out. Francis looked over at his sizzling brother and howled with laughter. "You go and get in the red fucking haze now, ain't you, boy?" Jason smoothly climbed to his feet, seized the thrashing Enoch lantern by the scruff of his neck, and then keeping hold of the collar, drove his head through one of the cabin windows. There was an explosion of glass as the baked retard shone like a broken turn signal, before Jason snatched the body back into the room and slammed it down onto the table. Had Enoch not been so utterly consumed with suffering, he would have done his best to put up a fight, if only to delay the inevitable. But his brain was being toasted, and he no longer had control over any part of his anatomy. The backcountry cannibal was now mere clay in Jason's hands. Just another victim. Jason picked up Enoch's meat cleaver and brought it down through his neck. The blade buried deep in the wood, pinning the corpse by fibrous strands to the hard oak surface. Steam rose from the freshly stewed blood. "Get off the family table!" squawked Ma. Jason turned and stomped towards her. Behind him, Francis finally got to thinking that Jason just might mean trouble. He grabbed a skillet off the range and came running to the attack. The pan was heavy enough to knock 4 trees out cold. In theory, anyways. "You leave her alone!" Grissom swiped Jason around the side of his head. the skillet clipping the hockey mask with a musical clang. Jason spun, and Francis, relieved to have distracted the killer away from Ma, hit him again and again like someone ringing a bastard bell at a funeral. But Jason barely flinched. As the flat iron bounced off his face guard one more time, Voorhees grabbed a poker from the fireplace and rammed it clean through Grissom's left thigh. "Oh, you cocksucker!" wailed Francis through clenched jaws. He fell to the floor and grabbed his legs with both hands. If he didn't know better, with the aroma of cooked meat and the hiss of spitting fat, it could have been breakfast time. Now in command, Jason glanced at the crippled jackass, took in the dropped skillet, and then went back for Ma. Francis called after him in desperation. "Voorhees, don't do it! You can join the family! Enoch was no use anyhow! We can be brothers! We can kill stuff! Francis, Grissom, and Man-Tits Voorhees! It'll be like old times with you and your ma! Listen to me, you dumb sack of shit!" Unmindful of his plea, Jason carried on. He lifted Ma out of her easy chair and threw the old bitch on the fire. She squealed and howled, kicked flames across the hearth, and her bones snapped in the heat like so much kindling. "You bastard son of a bitch!" shouted Francis. He unsheathed his bone knife and struggled to get up off the ground. But in one fluid motion, Jason lifted the flaming corpse out of the fireplace and threw it across the room. Francis screamed as the geriatric fireball crashed into him and knocked him back down. The knife went skidding out of his hands. He went scrabbling for it. Ma was lying on him, melting. His clothes were on fire, and it was getting too hot. He was burning. He just needed to reach the goddamn knife. He crawled as fast as his blazing maw would let him, until Jason stepped forward, placed a foot on the side of his head, and slowly pressed down. Francis heard his skull crack and felt the bone cutting into his soft stuff. He was finished, and he knew it. "Who's laughing now, Francis?" he sniggered faintly. "Who's fucking laughing now?" Then he was gone. Fire was raging through the cabin, but there was still one victim waiting to be killed. Jason found Paul writhing in his chair, but it wasn't fear or the heat of the flames that had Grissom squirming. It was laughter. With each horrific murder, the old bastard had choked on his spit, pissed his pants, and then blown his ass, all in that order. He'd never seen such quality entertainment in his miserable goddamn life. And now, with Jason staring at him like that, Paul just pointed a finger at the hockey mask and laughed even louder. Jason looked down on the feeble wretch. Then he glanced about the room at the fire spreading over every surface, entangling the old man within an incendiary web. Jason stiffened his back, turned, and promptly walked out of the building. The grass beneath his boots was instantly familiar, as was the voice that suddenly called his name. "Jason!" He stopped, listened. There it was again. Only the sound didn't enter through his ears. It came from within his mind. The voice was talking inside his head, and it was a voice he recognized. Over his shoulder, the cabin was now a bonfire in the night, and as Jason followed the voice deeper into the woods, Paul Grissom's laughter turned into screams.
Jason, my special, special boy. They must be punished, Jason, for what they did to you, for what they did to me. Kill for mother.
Okay, this has been Chapter 4 of Friday the 13th Carnival of Maniacs. And before we go any further, let's have a moment of silence for the dearly departed, my favorite characters to ever narrate, the Grissom family. Okay. Anyways, guys, I really enjoyed tonight's chapter. I can't wait to hear what you guys thought of it in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought, what you think of this book going forward, especially now that the man of the hour has awoken. And I guess the woman of the hour is awoken too. You know, it really is sad to see the Grissom family go, but man, did they go out in style. At the hands of Four Trees, at that. Also, we got all kinds of hell brewing with the Carnival Freak Show in town. And I don't think Trick and Zemal are long for this world. Not with Pamela Voorhees at the helm of Glow's psyche. Anyways, guys, I'll be back very soon with Friday the 13th, Carnival of Maniacs, Chapter 5 and beyond. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening, and